Mr. Chairman, a couple of quick questions for you. So I take it you support the Department of Education's recently announced reduction in force? Is that correct?
I do.
Okay. This is the 50% reduction in force that Secretary McMahon of the Department of Education has initiated, so wiping out half of the personnel at DOE, right?
I do.
Okay. And you support President Trump's executive order, which he's purporting to initiate the dismantling of the Department of Education?
I do.
Okay. This bill purports to create a number of statutory requirements that will be imposed on universities across the country, one of which is to file reports, as you've detailed. Who are those reports filed with?
It'll go to the Department of Education until...
To which department?
It will go to the Department of Education that is still in existence and will continue to be in existence until the Congress passes both houses.
I see.
For repeal.
So the university should file these reports with the department that just had half of its workforce eliminated and that President Trump has announced he would like to dismantle, both of which you support, but you believe we should pass this bill to impose reporting obligations on these universities. Who are they filing it with? I guess you're saying the 50% of the employees that are left, they'll file it with those folks?
That's the job of the Department of Education until it is no longer there.
I see.
That's what we deal with.
Sure, and once this administration has succeeded in its efforts to completely empty this agency, then what?
We move 117 to the appropriate entity that will handle it.
What entity is that?
That will be what we determine as Congress.
That you would determine as, that we would determine collectively as
determine
Congress. That sounds very different than what President Trump has
indicated. That's what he said as well. He indicated clearly that the Department of Education couldn't be fully eliminated without an act of Congress. He understands that as well.
This is what I'm trying to understand, Chairman Walberg, because I've reviewed every page of this bill. It imposes a number of comprehensive obligations and requirements on the Department of Education, right?
Correct.
Right. It requires the Department of Education to publish a database of every single report that is filed by institutions of higher education across the country, right?
Transparency, yes.
Correct. And that's, the website is supposed to be, the database is supposed to be updated every 30 days, right?
Correct.
Right. And it requires the Department of Education to engage in an interagency process in which they are initiating legal action with the Attorney General if they find that a report was filed invalidly, correct?
Correct.
Correct. I'm trying to better understand how you can come before this committee and ask the Congress to pass a bill imposing a litany of requirements on a department that you believe shouldn't exist, on a department that you just conceded you support emptying the bowels of this agency. Half of the people at the Department of Education are gone on administrative leave. And we're here entertaining a bill asking the department to publish a comprehensive database that will be updated in real time? Who do you think is going to build this database of you? I understand that you're passionate about it, but if you want this database built, why don't you support a Department of Education to build it? How can you ask us to eliminate the agency and simultaneously impose obligations at the same time?
Well, I believe the Department of Education, as constituted by this administration, will have that authority and will have that ability.
I have no idea what you just, what do you?
I'm answering your question. The entity that is responsible for it within the Department of Education will be expected to carry it out.
What entity?
I believe we have an administration in place that will expect things to be done and will get them done.
What entity?
The Department of Education.
Do you know whether the sub-agency that would be responsible for publishing this database or the technical people building this database, do you know whether they exist anymore?
They certainly exist anymore because the department is there.
Could you tell me what agency that is?
It has been downsized. The same department that was there is still there. It's just less in number.
Yeah, you know.
And efficiency
Chairman,
works in the private sector, ought to work in the public sector as well.
Look, I would just simply suggest to you that if you are this interested and this passionate, as you clearly are, and as many of your colleagues are, about changing the law and requiring more of the Department of Education, a good way to achieve that might not be cutting half of the workforce overnight. It doesn't quite make sense to me how one can make the argument that the department should be dismantled, abolished, eliminated, but by the way, let's spend time passing bills that impose additional requirements on the very department that you intend to eliminate. I don't get it. And I don't think the American people get it either. I understand, this bill a year ago, it was a reference by my colleague from Texas about bipartisan support that existed for the bill. And I understand, folks that have arguments about the merits of the bill. That was before the President of the United States announced that he intended to eliminate this department altogether, unlawfully, of course, but nonetheless, to your point, inasmuch as Congress obviously has the right and the constitutional authority to decide the fate of this department, feels like maybe the debate we should be having is whether or not the Department of Education should exist, since there are clearly many of my colleagues, it sounds like perhaps the chairman of the Education Committee included, who don't believe it should, and there are those of us who do believe it should. And those who fall in the latter camp, I think they have the right to be able to debate whether new requirements should be imposed on the agency. But I find it very rich to suggest to the workers at the Department of Education who are literally on administrative leave, half of them, thousands of people across the country, that we're debating whether or not we should impose more requirements on them since they don't really have jobs right now. I'll give you an opportunity to respond.
We're not imposing it on them. They are no longer part of the department. But I respect your position. But we still have to function in reality. And right now we have actors that are very negative toward our country, dangerous toward our country, as well as our educational policy that are involved. So it's time for us to take action and make sure that Section 117 is carried out.
Sure. So, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. What happens in 2 weeks when Secretary McMahon decides that instead of the 50% RIF that she's already implemented, she's going to do a 90% RIF? Then what?
We'll deal with that when it comes.
What do you?
Right now, we live in the reality of what is.
Okay, so the Secretary announces, this isn't a hypothetical. They eliminated half of the workforce already in the last 8 weeks. So if the Secretary decides that she's going to proceed a step further and eliminate another 40% of the agency, your argument essentially is, well, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. The Department of Education will decide which statutory requirements, which new mandates, unfunded mandates Republicans in Congress have decided to impose on the Education Department that they should comply with and which they shouldn't. That's basically it.
Well, I guess my answer to that again is that's another issue. We're dealing with the issue of dealing with clandestine, dangerous actors of countries that are donating and contributing to our educational system, especially our higher education institutions. And what do we do about that? How do we carry out Section 117 in a more productive way? Sure. And how do we deal with the reality of those clandestine actors and what they're doing right now? That's the issue of this bill. I'm not debating whether we reform, repeal, abolish Department of Education. What do we do with the responsibility we have now with national security?
And I hear you, Mr. Chairman. I hear you, and I hear the passion in your voice, and I think all I'm suggesting is, who do these colleges file these reports with? Who do they, the bill says that the Department of Education is supposed to create a new singular point of contact to work with all the universities so that we can address the national security concerns that you've articulated so well. And my question to you is, I don't know how the department is supposed to do that when you're eliminating the department.
Well, if we haven't eliminated the department.
They've gotten rid of half of it.
Well, it isn't all yet.
They're halfway there. Well, yeah, thank God.
The bottom
for the
line
students
is,
and the kids across the country. Yeah, I'm grateful that they haven't eliminated the other 50%. And of course, the order itself, as you know, is the subject of litigation that was initiated today. And I doubt that the executive order will ultimately survive scrutiny by the courts. But nonetheless, anyway, we belabored it. I'll give Ranking Member Scott an opportunity to respond, and then I'm happy to yield to
Just want to remind everybody that when we talk about national security, any significant gift is already reportable. In fact, under the Biden administration, they had over 100,000 reports of gifts and contracts totaling about $60 billion. It turns out a lot more than under the former Trump administration because Section 117 was been around for a long time. And this bill would increase astronomically the number of reports that have to be made.
Yeah, it's precisely the point, Ranking Member Scott and Chairman Walberg. I don't mean to be, confrontational. I guess I'm just suggesting maybe it's something we can consider with Chairwoman Fox when she returns. I think there should be a new rule for the Rules Committee, which is if you're going to submit a bill to the committee imposing obligations or requirements on an agency, you should have to believe that that agency should continue to exist. Like, that seems like a pretty simple requirement. So, for example, Chairman Wahlberg, if you believe that there should be certain requirements on the FBI, right, that there should be certain reports filed with the FBI, it would be reasonable to assume that you also believe the FBI should exist, right? It would be nonsensical to say, I have a bill, it's right here, and the bill says that the FBI shall do A, B, and C. But by the way, I don't believe that we should have an FBI, right? That wouldn't make sense, right? Or is that?
I would disagree to a point. I believe the function should be carried out, whether it's by FBI or any other agency is not the question. We deal with reality. Right now, the Department of Education, whether it's the large size, medium size, or the small size, is the department that deals with this issue.
Yeah, I'm not talking about size. The example I just gave you was its existence,
Well,
not its size.
It exists.
Yeah, correct.
It exists.
It does exist. But I didn't decide to put
It exists.
I didn't decide to put into this bill, Mr. Chairman, that the Secretary of Education would have responsibilities A, B, C, and D. You did. I didn't decide that the Department of Education would have obligations to create onerous databases that are updated every 30 days for the American public to view. You've decided that's important for the Department of Education to do, which is why you've proposed this bill. And I understand the reasons why. I'm simply suggesting it'd be probably pretty helpful to say, I think there should be a Department of Education to implement the bill that I've proposed that the Department of Education should implement. That doesn't seem controversial.
I respect your position.
All right. I thank the gentleman.
Mr. Neguse?
Yes, I'm
We're at
complete.
11:50, and I know that the new chairwoman has wanted to limit.
I
as best she
I
can.
appreciate your indulgence. I did want to yield 20 seconds here to my colleague from Pennsylvania, but I'm complete.
I appreciate that, and I will be brief. My colleague from Colorado raised the fact that we are tasked, that the Department of Education is tasked with certain responsibilities, and one of our colleagues, I think it was Mr. Langworthy, mentioned his interest in making sure that we are addressing anti-Semitism in our educational institutions. Of course, the Office of Civil Rights in the Department of Education is responsible for doing those investigations and having that redress, and with the riffing of half the Department of Education in Philadelphia alone, they laid off the entire Office of Civil Rights, dozens of people whose job it is to investigate and resolve those complaints. So this is a running theme here, that we have the administration basically gutting the functions of government, at the same time claiming that there are functions of government that have to be completed. So that's all. I'd yield back to Mr. Neguse.